Well, while the mainstream media plagues our televisions with Michael Jackson's death, uh, let's talk about real news. A journalist files against WHO, which is the World Health Organization, and the United Nations for bioterrorism and intent to commit mass murder. As the anticipated July release date for Baxter's H1N1 flu pandemic vaccine approaches, an Austrian investigates journalist is warning the world that the greatest crime in history of humanity is underway. Jane Burgermeister has recently filed criminal charges with the FBI against the WHO and the UN and several of the highest-ranking government and corporate officials concerning bioterrorism and attempts to commit mass murder. She also prepared an injunction against forced vaccination, which is being filed in America. These actions follow her charges filed in April against Baxter AG, Green Hills Biotechnology of Austria, for producing contaminated bird flu vaccine, alleging this was a deliberate act to cause profit from a pandemic. Summary of claims and allegations filed with FBI in Austria on June 10, 2009. In her charges, Burgermeister presents evidence of acts of bioterrorism that is in violation of U.S. law by a group operating within the U.S. under the direction of international bankers who control the Federal Reserve, as well as WHO and UN and NATO. This bioterrorism is for the purpose of carrying out a mass genocide against the U.S. population by use of a genetically engineered flu pandemic virus with the intent of causing death. This group is annexed high government offices in the U.S. Specifically, evidence is presented that the defendants, Barack Obama, President of the U.S., David Nabarro, UN System Coordinator for Influenza, Margaret Chan, Director General of WHO, Kathleen Sebelius, Secretary of Department of Health and Human Services, Janet Napolitano, Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, David D. Rothschild, banker, David Rockefeller, banker, George Soros, banker, Werner Faymann, Chancellor of Austria, and Alois Stauger, Austrian Health Minister, among others, are part of this international corporate criminal syndicate which has developed, produced, stockpiled, and employed biological weapons to eliminate the population of the U.S. and other countries for financial and political gain. The charges contend that these defendants conspired with each other and others to devise, fund, participate in the final phase of the implementation of a covert international bioweapons program involving the pharmaceutical companies Baxter and Novartis. They did this by bioengineering and then releasing lethal biological agents, specifically the bird flu virus and the swine flu virus, in order to have a pretext to implement a forced mass vaccination program, which would be the means of administering a toxic biological agent to cause death and injury to the people of the U.S. This action is in direct violation of the Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act. Burgermeister's charges include evidence that Baxter AG, Austrian subsidiary of Baxter International, deliberately sent out 72 kilos of live bird flu viruses supplied by the World Health Organization in the winter of 2009 and 16 laboratories in 4 counties. She claims this evidence offers clear proof that the pharmaceutical companies and international government agencies themselves are actively engaged in producing, developing, manufacturing, and distributing biological agents classified as the most deadly bioweapons on Earth in order to trigger a pandemic and cause mass death. In her April charges, she noted that Baxter's lab in Austria, one of the supposedly most secure biosecurity labs in the world, did not adhere to the most basic and essential steps to keep 72 kilos of a pathogen classified as a bioweapon, secure and separate from other substances under stringent biosecurity level regulations, but it allowed it to be mixed with the ordinary human flu virus and sent from its facilities in Orth in the Donau. In February, when a mass member of Biotest in the Czech Republic tested the material meant for candidate vaccines on ferrets, the ferrets died. This incident was not followed up by an investigation from the WHO, EU, or Austrian health authorities. There was no investigation of the content of the virus material, and there is no data on the genetic sequence of the virus released. In answer to the questions on May 20th, the Austrian health minister Alois Stogger revealed that the incident had been handled not as a biosecurity lapse, as it should have been, but as an offense against the veterinary code. A veterinary doctor was sent to the lab for a brief inspection. Burgmeister dossier reveals that the release of the virus was to be an essential step for triggering a pandemic that would allow the WHO to declare a level 6 pandemic. She lists the laws and decrees that would allow the UN and WHO to take over the United States in the event of pandemic. In addition, legislation requiring compliance with mandatory vaccines would be put into force in the U.S. under conditions of pandemic declaration. She charges that the entire swine flu pandemic business is premised on a massive lie that there is no natural virus out there that poses a threat to the population. She presents evidence leading to the belief that the bird flu and swine flu viruses have in fact been bioengineered in laboratories using funding supplied by the WHO and other government agencies, among others. This swine flu is a hybrid of part of swine flu, part of human flu, and part bird flu, something that can only come from laboratories according to many experts. WHO's claim that the swine flu is spreading and a pandemic must be declared ignores the fundamental causes. The viruses that were releases were created and released with the help of WHO, and WHO is overwhelmingly responsible for the pandemic in the first place. In addition, the symptoms of the supposed swine flu are undistinguishable from regular flu or the common cold. The swine flu does not cause death any more often than the regular flu causes death. This is what the WHO claims. Burgmeister notes that the figures for deaths reported for the swine flu are inconsistent, and there is no clarity as to how the number of deaths has been documented. There is no pandemic potential unless mass vaccinations are carried out to weaponize the flu under the guise of protecting the population. There are responsible grounds for believing that the mandatory vaccines will be purposely contaminated with diseases that are specifically designed to cause death. Reference is made to a licensed Novartis bird flu vaccine that killed 21 homeless people in Poland in the summer of 2008, and had as its primary outcome measure an adverse events rate, thereby meeting the U.S. government's own definition of a bioweapon with a delivery system injection. She alleges that the same complex of international pharmaceutical companies and international government agencies that have developed and released pandemic material have positioned themselves to profit from triggering the pandemic, which contracts to supply vaccines. Media controlled by the group that is engineering the swine flu agenda is spreading misinformation to lull the people of the U.S. into taking a dangerous vaccine. The people of the U.S. will suffer substantial and irreparable harm and injury if they are forced to take this unproven vaccine without their consent in accordance with the Model State Emergency Health Powers Act, National Emergency Act, National Security Presidential Directive NSPD 51, Homeland Security Presidential Directive HSPD 20, and the International Partnership on Avian and Pandemic Influenza. In the U.S. since 2008, Burgermeister charges that those named in her allegations have implemented new and or accelerated the implementation of laws and regulations designed to strip the citizen of the U.S. of their lawful constitutional rights to refuse an injection. These people have created or allowed provisions to remain in place that make it a criminal act to refuse to take an injection against pandemic viruses. They have imposed other excessive and cruel penalties such as imprisonment and or quarantine in FEMA camps, while barring the citizens of the U.S. from claiming compensation from injury or death from the forced injections. This is in violation of the laws governing federal corruption and the abuse of office, as well as the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Through these actions, the named defendants have laid the groundwork for mass genocide. Using the swine flu as a pretext, the defendants have pre-planned the mass murder of the U.S. population by means of forced vaccination. They have installed an extensive network of FEMA concentration camps and identified mass grave sites. And they have been involved in devising and implementing a scheme to hand power over to the U.S. to an international crime syndicate that uses the UN and WHO as a front for illegal racketeering influenced organized crime activities.